Years had passed since the CEO had abruptly ended things with her. At the time, she had been devastated. She didn't understand why he had walked away after everything they'd shared. He had seemed so certain about their future, yet one day, out of the blue, he simply told her he wasn't ready to settle down. The words echoed in her mind, each one laced with confusion. She tried to move on, but it wasn't easy. After the breakup, there was a long stretch of uncertainty. But then something clicked. She didn't want to be stuck in the past, and she didn't want to let her heartbreak define her. She picked herself up, decided to start fresh, and opened a cafe in the heart of the city. It wasn't much at first, just a small, cozy space where she could escape the outside world and focus on the people who came through her doors. It was a place for comfort, not just for the customers, but for her too. She poured everything she had into the cafe, and slowly but surely it started to grow. The cafe became her sanctuary. She built a life there, one cup of coffee at a time. There were moments when it felt like she had found her new rhythm, especially after her daughter came into the world. She never expected to be raising a child on her own, but the love she had for her daughter gave her the strength to keep going. The cafe wasn't just her business. It was her purpose. Her daughter was her world, and together, they made a home out of the cafe, creating memories in the same space where strangers came for a warm drink and a moment of peace. And then, one afternoon he walked in. She wasn't expecting it. The cafe was busier than usual, with the usual hum of customers chatting over their drinks. She had just finished preparing an order when she heard the door open, the soft chime of the bell ringing in the air. She looked up, expecting to see another customer, but then her heart skipped a beat. There he was, standing in the doorway, looking just as he had all those years ago. It was him. Her breath caught in her throat. It took her a moment to process what was happening. He hadn't changed much on the outside. He still had that confident air about him, the same sharp suit and neatly combed hair. But there was something different in his eyes, something that told her he was no longer the man she had known. She felt a knot form in her stomach as she tried to steady herself. She hadn't seen him in years, and yet, in that moment, it felt like no time had passed at all. He seemed to hesitate at the entrance, taking in the cafe with a glance, as if trying to decide whether to come inside or not. The door swung shut behind him, and the sound of the chime faded away, leaving only the distant murmur of the other patrons. She stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. Her hands were suddenly clammy, and she felt a rush of emotions she hadn't expected. The past seemed to creep back in uninvited, and she had to fight the urge to run and hide. He caught her eye, and for a brief second, their gazes locked. He didn't recognize her at first. The shock in his eyes was evident. He was clearly trying to place her. She stood still, unsure of how to react. She could tell he was trying to recall who she was, but he seemed lost in the moment, almost as if he had forgotten the woman who had once been so important to him. After a long pause, he took a step forward. The sound of his polished shoes on the floor broke the silence between them. "Hi," he said with a small smile, his voice steady but distant. "I'll have the usual, please." Her heart was racing. The usual, of course. He had always liked his coffee a certain way. But it wasn't just about the coffee now. It was about the years that had passed, the time they had lost, and the sudden reappearance of a man who had once been a part of her life. She nodded, forcing herself to keep her composure. "Sure," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. She turned to make his coffee, her hands moving on autopilot as she tried to process everything. She had built a life for herself in his absence, and she hadn't expected him to walk into her world like this, as if nothing had changed. He stood at the counter, waiting quietly, his eyes scanning the room. It seemed like he was trying to adjust to the reality of this situation. She could tell he was uncomfortable, but she couldn't decide if it was because of the time that had passed, or because he had walked into a place that had so many memories attached to it, memories of a time when everything had seemed possible. As she handed him the cup, their eyes met again, and this time there was a flicker of recognition. He didn't say anything, but she could see it in his face. He knew who she was now. The realization hit him as if a veil had been lifted. She could almost hear his thoughts, wondering if she would be the same person he remembered, if she was still carrying any of the pain he had left behind. "Thank you," he said, breaking the silence. He took a sip of his coffee, his expression neutral but not unfriendly. She nodded in response, not trusting herself to speak. There was so much she wanted to say, so many questions she wanted to ask, but she didn't know where to start. The years had changed her, but so much of what had happened still lingered in the background, clouding the air between them. He took another sip, and for a moment the cafe seemed to fall silent, as if the world had paused. The soft clinking of cups and the hum of conversation faded into the background. There they were, two people who had once shared so much, now standing in the same space but so far apart in their lives. The distance between them was more than just physical. It was emotional, unspoken and yet very real. She didn't know what he was thinking, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was wondering what had happened to her, what had become of the woman he had walked away from. Did he even remember how deeply it had hurt? Or had he moved on so completely that she was just a distant memory, something that no longer mattered in the grand scheme of his life? The questions swirled in her mind, but she kept them to herself. She had no answers to give him, not yet. She wasn't sure she even wanted to know his answers. After all, what difference would it make now? He had made his choice all those years ago, and she had rebuilt her life without him. But as he stood there in front of her, that old ache returned, and she found herself wondering if he ever regretted it. With a final glance, he nodded and turned to leave. She watched him walk out of the cafe, his presence lingering in the air long after the door had closed behind him. The bell above the door jingled, and for a moment everything went quiet again. Her heart was still racing and her hands felt shaky. The world around her felt different now, as though something had shifted in the fabric of her life. As she returned to her work, she couldn't help but wonder if this was just a fleeting encounter, or if it was something more, a sign that the past was about to catch up with her in ways she hadn't expected. And then, just as she thought the moment was over, something happened that would change everything. It had been a few days since he walked into her cafe. The encounter replayed in her mind constantly. At first she tried to brush it off, to tell herself it was just a coincidence, a random meeting in a busy world. But deep down she knew that it wasn't just a coincidence. Life had a way of bringing people together again, even after so many years. And this time, the person she had once loved and lost was back in her life, even if it was only for a brief moment. She had spent those few days trying to get back to her routine. The cafe was busy as always. The hum of conversation, the clinking of cups, the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee, it all felt like home. But despite the steady rhythm of her daily work, there was a part of her that felt out of sync. Her thoughts kept drifting back to that moment, the moment when their eyes met. That split second when the past came rushing back, and she had to confront everything she had buried so deeply inside. It wasn't just the shock of seeing him again. It was the realization that despite everything that had happened, she still felt something. The hurt, the betrayal, and the unanswered questions, they were all still there. And that realization shook her more than she was willing to admit. The days passed slowly and she tried to focus on her work. But her daughter, who had been so eager to get to know the world around her, couldn't help but notice her mother's distraction. She had grown used to seeing her mom smile and laugh, always present, always focused on the cafe and the people they served. But lately her mom seemed distant, lost in thought, as though something was weighing on her heart. One afternoon her daughter tugged at her sleeve, pulling her away from the counter. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft and full of concern. Her daughter's innocent question took her by surprise. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine, sweetie," she replied, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Just tired, that's all." But her daughter wasn't convinced. She had always been able to sense when something was wrong, and this time was no different. She stared at her mother with a look of quiet understanding, but she didn't push further. Instead, she went back to coloring in her notebook, as if trusting her mother's words even if she didn't fully believe them. It was moments like these that made her realize how much her daughter meant to her. The little girl had no idea about the complexities of the past, about the heartbreak her mother had endured. To her, the world was simple. It was full of colors, crayons, and the smell of fresh pastries. Her daughter didn't need to know about the pain her mother had carried for so long. All she needed was love, and that's what her mother had given her, unconditionally. But that evening, something unexpected happened. He came back to the cafe. She had been serving a customer when she saw him walk through the door again. The familiar chime of the bell echoed in the quiet cafe, and for a moment everything else seemed to fade away. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to return not so soon. This time, though, he wasn't alone. He had a briefcase in hand and his expression was different, more serious than before. He looked around the room as if searching for something, his eyes scanning the tables before they landed on her. There was no mistake this time. He knew exactly who she was. She couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: surprise, anger, confusion, and something else she wasn't quite ready to face. He had hurt her so deeply all those years ago. He had left without a word, without a reason, and the scars from that abandonment ran deeper than she cared to admit. But now here he was, standing in her cafe, as if everything could just be picked up where it left off. He walked toward her slowly, his steps measured and deliberate. When he reached the counter, he didn't speak right away. He just stood there looking at her with a mix of hesitation and determination. "I need to talk to you," he said finally, his voice softer than before. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. She could see that something had changed in him, but she couldn't quite tell what it was. He wasn't the same man who had walked out on her so many years ago. The world had changed him, but the question was, had it made him better? Or was he still the same person who had once broken her heart? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a deep breath, trying to calm the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. She had every right to be angry, to demand answers, but at the same time, part of her was curious. Part of her wanted to know why he had come back. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steady though her heart was racing. He hesitated again before speaking. I didn't know you had a child," he said quietly, as if the words were hard for him to say. Her stomach churned. Of course he didn't know. He had never been there. He hadn't been a part of her life when she had needed him most, and now, years later, he was acting as if it was all just a misunderstanding. She tried not to let her frustration show. She had spent so long keeping the pain of their past buried deep inside. "Why should you know?" she replied, her words colder than she intended. "You left, remember? You made your choice." He flinched, his eyes softening with regret. "I know I hurt you. I never should have left the way I did." She didn't want to hear his apologies. She didn't want to revisit that pain. She had moved on, she had to. But as he stood there, his face filled with genuine remorse, she couldn't help but wonder what it would be like if they could just move past it all. What if the past didn't have to define their future? She shook her head as if trying to clear her thoughts. "It's been years. I've moved on. And I don't need you to fix anything now. I've built a life for myself." "I see that," he said, glancing around at the cafe. "I see that you've done well. I'm proud of you." Proud? She couldn't believe he was saying that. After everything, after walking away from her without a second thought, now he was proud of her. The words stung more than she expected. "Thanks," she said flatly. "But I don't need your approval." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She felt the weight of the silence between them, thick and heavy, as though the past was pressing in on them from all sides. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "I didn't come here to make things right," he said, his tone filled with something she couldn't quite place. "I came here because I want to know my daughter." Her heart skipped a beat. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had expected many things from him: apologies, regrets, maybe even anger. But she hadn't expected this. Her daughter. He wanted to know his daughter, the child he hadn't even known existed until now. The words hung in the air between them. Her mind raced, trying to process what he had just said. He wanted to know his daughter. After all these years, after everything that had happened, he suddenly wanted to be a part of her life. The shock was overwhelming. She had never imagined this moment, never allowed herself to even think about what would happen if he came back. And yet here he was, standing in front of her, asking to be a part of something that had always been hers alone. Her heart pounded as she tried to keep her composure. She had always been good at hiding her emotions, at putting on a brave face for the world. But this was different. This was personal. Her daughter was her everything. She had built her world around her little girl, and no one, not even the man who had walked away from them, had the right to come back and disrupt that. For a long moment, she didn't speak. She simply stared at him, trying to make sense of what he was asking. Could she really let him in? Could she really let him be a part of her daughter's life after everything that had happened? He had left her without a word, and now he was asking for access to the most precious thing she had ever created. "Why now?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why after all these years?" He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with the question. His gaze dropped to the floor for a moment before he looked back at her. I know it's late. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I want to know my daughter. I can't keep going on without at least trying to be a part of her life. I've made mistakes and I can't change the past, but I want to make things right if I can. Her mind was still reeling. The words were too much to process all at once. He had left. He had made a choice all those years ago and now he wanted to undo it all? It didn't make sense. She had built a life without him. She had found a way to move on, to make peace with what had happened. And now, here he was, asking for something she wasn't sure she was willing to give. She glanced toward the back of the cafe, where her daughter was sitting, coloring quietly at a table. Her little girl was blissfully unaware of the storm raging in her mother's heart. She had no idea that the man she had never met, the man who had once been a part of her mother's life, was now standing in front of them, asking to be a part of hers. Her daughter looked so peaceful, so innocent. The thought of bringing this stranger into her life, this man who had no place there, felt wrong. But at the same time, she couldn't deny the curiosity that had sparked in her daughter's eyes when she had first seen him. She had called him Daddy without even thinking, and that simple word had shattered everything. He was her father. He had a right to be in her life whether she wanted him there or not. But did that mean she had to let him back in? Could she really forgive him for what he had done? Her thoughts were interrupted when he spoke again. I know this isn't easy. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for a chance to get to know her. Maybe we could take it slow, see how things go. She felt a wave of anger rise in her chest. Slow? After all these years, he wanted to take it slow? He didn't get to decide how this would go. She had spent so many years wondering about the choices he had made, wondering why he had left her without a word, and now he wanted to waltz back into their lives like it was nothing. The nerve of him. I don't think you understand, she said, her voice sharper than she had intended. You don't get to just come back and expect everything to be okay. You left us. You made that choice, and I had to pick up the pieces. My daughter doesn't know you, and I don't know if I want her to. He seemed taken aback by her words, and for a moment he didn't know how to respond. His eyes were filled with regret, but she wasn't sure if it was enough. Regret didn't change anything. Regret didn't erase the years of hurt and confusion that had built up inside her. I know I can't change what happened, he said quietly, but I'm asking for a chance. That's all I'm asking. A chance to prove that I can be a part of her life if you'll let me. The silence between them grew heavy, and she could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about her daughter, and she couldn't make this decision lightly. Her daughter deserved better than a man who had walked away from them. But was it fair to deny him the opportunity to be a part of her life? To deny her daughter the chance to know her father? The questions swirled in her mind, each one more complicated than the last. She didn't know what the right answer was. She didn't know what the future held. All she knew was that her life had always been about protecting her daughter, about making sure she had everything she needed. And now this man who had left them behind, was asking to be a part of that. I need to think about it, she said finally, her voice tired. This isn't something I can decide in a minute. He nodded, his face a mixture of relief and uncertainty. I understand. Take all the time you need. With that, he turned and walked toward the door. She watched him leave, her mind spinning. Part of her felt like she had made the right choice, setting boundaries, not letting him waltz back in. But another part of her felt like she was closing a door on something that could be good for her daughter. What was she supposed to do? She walked over to where her daughter was sitting. Her little girl was still absorbed in her coloring, blissfully unaware of the conversation that had just unfolded. She sat down beside her, watching her as she carefully colored in the lines of her picture. Mommy, who was that man? Her daughter asked, looking up at her with wide, curious eyes. Her heart sank. She had hoped her daughter wouldn't ask. She wasn't ready to have this conversation yet. She wasn't sure she ever would be. That was someone from Mommy's past, she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. Someone I used to know? Her daughter nodded, not pressing further. She returned to her coloring, and for a moment everything felt normal again. But the truth was, nothing would ever be the same. He was back in their lives now, whether she was ready for it or not. And as much as she wanted to protect her daughter from the complexities of the past, she knew that the past had a way of catching up with you. The question now was, How would they move forward from here? Days passed, and life at the cafe continued its usual rhythm. The steady buzz of conversation, the clink of coffee cups, and the warmth of the freshly baked pastries filled the air. But for her, everything felt different now. The world around her seemed to have shifted just slightly, but enough to make her feel unsettled. Her thoughts kept drifting back to him, to his words, to the look in his eyes when he asked to be a part of her daughter's life. She hadn't expected to be in this position. When they had first met, when they were young and in love, she had never imagined their lives would take such different paths. She had thought they were building something together, that they had a future, but when he left, it shattered her in ways she couldn't explain. She had to rebuild her life from scratch, raising her daughter alone, and she had poured every ounce of energy into making sure that her daughter would never feel the absence of the father who had walked away. But now, everything was changing again. The man who had once been her world was asking for a chance to know their daughter. He wanted to be part of their lives, and she didn't know if she could let him. The thought of him being involved in her daughter's life brought up so many emotions: anger, hurt, confusion, but also a part of her wondered what it would mean for her daughter. Would it be good for her to know her father, or would it open up a wound that she had spent years trying to heal? She couldn't talk to her friends about it. They wouldn't understand. They saw her as a strong, independent woman who had built everything on her own. They wouldn't understand how hard it was to even think about letting him back into her life. She had worked so hard to build a wall around her heart, to protect herself and her daughter from the pain of the past. And now, here he was, asking her to tear it all down. It was the quiet moments that got to her the most, the moments when she would catch herself staring out the window, lost in thought, wondering if she was making the right choice. Was she holding on to old wounds because she was too scared to let go? Or was she protecting herself and her daughter from someone who might hurt them again? Her daughter, as always, seemed oblivious to the turmoil in her mother's heart. She was a happy, curious child full of life and energy. She had no idea of the complex emotions swirling around her mother. She just wanted to spend time with her, to draw pictures, to play, to laugh, and that innocence was both a comfort and a reminder of how much she had to protect. One afternoon, as her daughter sat coloring in the corner of the cafe, a familiar face walked through the door. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. The way the door opened, the familiar sound of footsteps, it was him again. He had come back. This time he didn't hesitate. He walked straight up to the counter, his eyes focused on her. She felt a flutter in her chest, a mix of emotions that she didn't know how to deal with. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly, his voice more serious than before. She could feel her stomach tighten. The last thing she wanted was to have another conversation with him. The last thing she wanted was for her daughter to see him again, to get attached, only to have him leave like he had all those years ago. She had promised herself she would never let that happen. She wouldn't let him hurt her daughter the way he had hurt her, but she also knew she couldn't avoid him forever. If he was serious about being a part of their daughter's life, they needed to have this conversation. And so, with a deep breath, she nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "We can talk." He gestured toward the corner where they could sit and talk privately. She walked with him, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. What was he going to say this time? What was he expecting? Was he ready for the reality of being a father? Or was this all just some guilt trip, some way for him to feel better about the past? They sat down at the small table by the window. The cafe was quiet at this time of day, with only a few regulars scattered around. The sunlight streamed in through the window, casting a warm glow over everything. It was peaceful here, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions inside her. He didn't speak right away. For a moment, he just sat there, his hands folded in front of him, looking at her as though waiting for her to say something. She had always hated silence, but right now it felt like the weight of the past was pressing down on both of them. "I don't know what you want from me," she said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but the anger that simmered beneath the surface was unmistakable. "You can't just walk in here after all these years and expect everything to be okay." "I know," he said, his voice soft. "I know I can't just make up for what I did. I can't change the past, but I want to try. I'm not asking for you to forgive me right away. I'm asking for a chance to show you that I can be there. For her. For both of you." She stared at him, unsure of what to say. He was right about one thing: he couldn't change the past. The past was what it was. It was full of pain and regret, of unanswered questions and broken promises. But could she let that dictate their future? Could she really deny him the chance to be a father to their daughter, even after everything that had happened? "I don't know if I can do this," she said quietly, her voice breaking a little. "I don't know if I can let you in. I've worked so hard to protect her, to make sure she never feels the emptiness of a father who walked away. And now you want to come back and be a part of her life. I don't know if I can let that happen." He reached across the table, his hand hovering for a moment before he placed it gently on hers. She didn't pull away, though she wanted to. There was something in his touch that made her feel vulnerable, something that reminded her of the man she had once loved. It was so easy to fall back into the past, to forget everything that had happened. But she couldn't do that. "Not now. I'm not asking you to forget the past," he said softly. "I'm asking for a chance to be a part of her life, a chance to make up for the time I lost. I know it won't be easy. I know I don't deserve a second chance. But I'm here, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes." She closed her eyes, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. She had spent so many years building a life on her own, raising her daughter by herself. She had never needed him. But now here he was asking for something she wasn't sure she could give. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't promise anything." He nodded, his expression serious but understanding. "That's all I'm asking for. Just think about it. Take your time." He stood up, his chair scraping softly against the floor. "I'll be here when you're ready," he said before turning and walking out of the cafe. She sat there for a long time, long after he had left, her mind swirling with questions. Was she making the right choice? Could she really let him back in? And what would it mean for her daughter? Could they have the family they never had? Or were this just open old wounds that were better left untouched? Her daughter's laughter broke through her thoughts, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this. She had built a life for her daughter, one full of love and stability, but now she had to decide if she was willing to let someone from the past come in and change that. And if she did, would it be worth the risk? The following days were filled with a mixture of quiet reflection and deep uncertainty. She couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. He wanted to be a part of their daughter's life, and though part of her wanted to shut the door completely, to protect everything she had worked for, another part of her wondered if she was being too harsh, too protective. Could she really deny him the chance to be a father to his child? Could she keep her daughter from knowing her father, from understanding the man who had helped bring her into this world? It wasn't a decision she could make quickly, and she knew it. Her emotions were a whirlwind: anger, confusion, fear, and most of all, doubt. Doubt about him, doubt about herself, and doubt about whether opening the door to the past would lead to a future worth having. At night, she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. Her daughter, who had fallen asleep hours ago, lay peacefully beside her, unaware of the conflict that was swirling in her mother's mind. She had always been her mother's world. She had always been the reason she got up every morning, the reason she worked so hard to create a stable life for them both. But now this new reality was pushing into that world, like a shadow she couldn't escape. He had said he wanted to take it slow, to prove himself. But what did that even mean? Could he really prove himself after all these years? Could he show up now and be the father she had needed when she was younger? And more importantly, could she trust him with her daughter's heart after everything he had done? She knew it wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It wasn't about forgiving him for leaving. She had done that years ago, when she realized that holding on to the anger and hurt would only keep her from moving forward. What mattered now was whether she could give him a place in their lives. And the fear that it might all go wrong, that he might leave again, was almost too much to bear. A week had passed since their last conversation, and he hadn't come back to the cafe. She had been waiting for him to show up, to push her to make a decision, but he hadn't. The silence made her restless. She didn't know if she was waiting for him to come back or if she was waiting for her own courage to show up. And then one afternoon he walked through the door again. This time she wasn't surprised. She had been expecting him, though she didn't know why. Maybe she was waiting for a sign, something to tell her what to do. Or maybe deep down she knew this moment would come again. She looked up from the counter as he entered, his eyes immediately finding hers. He didn't look nervous this time, not the way he had the first time he'd returned. There was a sense of calm about him now, a quiet determination in his expression. He walked up to the counter and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of everything that had happened between them. Finally, he broke the silence. "Can we talk?" he asked again, his voice steady but laced with an urgency that she hadn't heard before. She didn't know what to say. Her heart was racing, and she could feel the familiar tension building inside her. But this time she didn't hesitate. She nodded, motioning for him to follow her to the corner of the cafe, away from the bustle of customers. They sat down, and once again she found herself facing him, unsure of what to expect. He was calm, but there was a vulnerability in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. She could tell he wasn't just doing this for himself. He was doing it for their daughter. "I've been thinking about what you said," he started, his voice softer this time. "I know I can't change the past, but I want to try to make things right. I know it's going to take time, but I'm not asking for everything at once. I'm just asking for a chance to get to know her, to show her that I'm here. For both of you." She listened quietly, not interrupting. Her thoughts were still a swirl of confusion, but something in his words struck a chord with her. He wasn't asking for her to forgive him right away. He wasn't asking for everything to go back to how it was. He was asking for a chance, a small one, but a chance nonetheless. "I've had a lot of time to think too," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "And I know it's not going to be easy. But I also know that she deserves to know who you are. She deserves to know that she has a father, even if it's not the way I imagined. But I have to ask, are you ready for this? Are you ready to be there for her? Not just when it's convenient, but when it matters?" He didn't hesitate. "I am. I'm ready." She studied him for a moment, searching his face for any signs that he was just saying what he thought she wanted to hear. But there was nothing there except sincerity. It wasn't the same man who had walked out on her so many years ago. The man in front of her now had changed, and somehow she could feel it. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the nerves that were slowly creeping up inside her. This wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be simple. But she couldn't deny the truth that had been growing inside her. Her daughter deserved the chance to know her father. And maybe, just maybe, she deserved a chance to see if they could build something new. "I'm willing to give you that chance," she said finally, her voice filled with both relief and fear. "But it's not going to be easy. I'm not going to let you hurt her again. And I'm not going to pretend like everything is okay. But if you're willing to show up to be there, then we can try." He nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I won't let you down." The conversation wasn't over, but something had shifted in that moment. There was still so much unknown, so many things they had to figure out. But for the first time, she felt a sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. Later that day, after the cafe had quieted down and her daughter had gone to bed, she sat alone, reflecting on the decision she had just made. She wasn't sure what the future held. She wasn't sure if it would work out the way she hoped. But one thing was clear. They had taken the first step toward something new. And that was all she could do. Take it one step at a time. The next morning, when her daughter came into the cafe, she saw the man again. He was standing by the counter, smiling gently at her, as though waiting for her to notice him. Her daughter hesitated for a moment, and then, with a burst of excitement, she ran over to him. "Daddy," she exclaimed, her face lighting up with joy. The word hit her like a wave, a rush of emotions that she wasn't ready for. But as she watched her daughter, so innocent and full of life, she realized that this was the beginning of something new. A chance for them to heal, to grow, and to build a future together, no matter how uncertain that future might be. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything could be okay. The weeks that followed were a delicate balancing act. She had made the decision to give him a chance, to let him be a part of their daughter's life. But with each passing day, the complexity of the situation became more evident. She had spent so many years keeping the past buried, locking away the pain and the anger that now, with him back in their lives, the emotions she thought she had moved past came rushing back. It was a strange feeling, like walking on thin ice, unsure of how much pressure it could bear before it cracked. Her daughter seemed to adjust more easily than she had expected. Every time she saw her father, her face would light up with excitement, and she would run to him with open arms, calling him Daddy, without hesitation. It was as if the years without him had never happened, as if he had always been a part of her world. And in a way, it was beautiful. Watching her little girl form a connection with her father, someone she had never known, was both heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time. It reminded her of what she had lost, but also of what they could have. For him, things seemed to be falling into place. He had taken to spending more time at the cafe, sometimes even helping out with small tasks. She wasn't sure what his intentions were, but for now, he seemed genuinely committed to being there for their daughter. And though she couldn't deny the progress he had made, she couldn't shake the nagging doubt that lingered in the back of her mind. Was this real? Was he really ready to be a father? Or was this just a temporary attempt to make himself feel better? As much as she wanted to believe in his change, her heart was still guarded. Every time she watched him with her daughter, part of her wanted to believe that this was the beginning of something beautiful. But another part of her couldn't forget the past, the abandonment, the unanswered questions, the pain of raising their daughter alone. She had done it for so long, and now with him back, it felt like she was opening up a door she wasn't sure she could close again. There were moments, fleeting but intense, when she found herself drawn back to the old feelings, the ones she had pushed aside for so long. His smile, the way he spoke to their daughter, the way he seemed to want to be a part of their lives, it all brought back memories of their younger days, when they had been so full of hope and dreams. But the memories were bittersweet. She couldn't erase the hurt, the way he had walked away without a second thought. And as much as she wanted to forgive him, as much as she wanted to believe that people could change, she couldn't help but be cautious. She had worked too hard to build a life without him, and she wasn't sure she was ready to let him back in completely. One evening, after the cafe had closed and her daughter was fast asleep, she found herself sitting at the kitchen table, lost in thought. She stared out the window, watching the streetlights flicker in the distance, but her mind was miles away. The decision she had made to give him a chance weighed heavily on her, and she couldn't escape the feeling that she was standing at a crossroads, unsure of which path to take. The sound of the door opening broke her thoughts, and she turned to see him standing in the doorway. He had come by to check on her, just as he had been doing every night since they had begun this new chapter. It wasn't unusual for him to drop by, but tonight something felt different. There was an urgency in his expression, something she couldn't quite place. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice gentle but serious. She nodded, gesturing for him to sit down across from her. He didn't hesitate, and soon they were sitting in the quiet of the kitchen, the only sound the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. She waited for him to speak, her heart racing, unsure of what was coming. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know I've made mistakes. I know I've hurt you. And I know that I can't undo the past, but I want to be here for both of you. I want to be a father to her, and I want to be someone you can count on. I don't want to keep living in the shadow of what happened. I want to move forward to build something real." She looked at him, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. It wasn't the first time he had said something like this, but this time, something about the way he spoke made her believe him. There was a sincerity in his voice, a quiet determination that she hadn't heard before. He wasn't asking for forgiveness, at least not in the way she had expected. He wasn't asking her to forget what had happened. He was simply asking for the chance to prove that he could be there for them, to show that he was ready to be a part of their lives. "I've been scared," she admitted, her voice soft but raw. "Scared that you would leave again. Scared that I'd let you in and then you'd walk away when things got hard. I've spent so many years protecting her, and I've been protecting myself too. I don't know if I'm ready to let go of that fear. I don't know if I'm ready to trust you again." He nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "I get it. I know it's not easy, and I know I've lost your trust. I can't change that. But I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for the long haul, and I'll do whatever it takes to prove that to you." The sincerity in his voice made her heart ache. She had spent so long keeping the walls around her heart high, refusing to let anyone inside. And now, with him standing there asking for a chance to prove himself, she realized that she had been holding on to her fear for too long. It wasn't just fear of him leaving again. It was fear of opening herself up, of letting someone else into her world. But as she looked at him, as she saw the man he had become, she knew that this was her chance to heal. This was her chance to finally let go of the past, to stop carrying the weight of old wounds, and maybe, just maybe, it was her chance to give her daughter the family she had always deserved. "I'm scared too," she said finally, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm scared of getting hurt again. But I don't want to let fear control my life anymore. I want to try. I want to give you a chance for her, for us." He reached across the table, taking her hand gently in his. For a moment they just sat there, their fingers intertwined, sharing a quiet moment of understanding. It wasn't a perfect solution. There were still so many unanswered questions, so many uncertainties, but in that moment they both knew that they had taken the first step toward healing, toward building something new. "I'll do everything I can to make this work," he said softly. "I promise you that." And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe him. The days that followed were a mixture of hope and cautious optimism. She watched as he continued to spend time with their daughter, slowly building a relationship with her. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of awkwardness, moments where the past seemed to linger in the background, reminding them of what had been lost. But there were also moments of joy, moments when their daughter would laugh, her little face lighting up with happiness as she played with him, and in those moments she saw the father he could be. And she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this could work. But it wasn't just about their daughter anymore. It was about them too. It was about rebuilding the trust that had been broken, about forging a new path forward together. It wasn't going to be easy, and there were still plenty of challenges ahead. But for the first time she felt a sense of peace, a sense of possibility. And that was something she hadn't felt in a long time.